Good to see everybody here tonight. I'm Eugene Flanagan, Director of General and International Collections here at the Library of Congress. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the Jefferson Building in particular, gateway to 1,000 years of world history and culture. And tonight we are shining a light on one significant aspect of that cultural heritage, African poets and writers, paying tribute to one author in particular, Ngūgĩ Thiong'o. Tonight's program is the latest installment in the popular Conversations with African Poets and Writers series created by the African section of the African and Middle Eastern Division. Our African program advises the library's acquisitions, provides reference and bibliographic services, and networks with other research and teaching institutions across the United States and abroad, all in the service of supporting a vibrant community of learning and inclusion and deeper cultural understanding. The Conversations series is in keeping with this intent and has its origins in the library's tribute in 2008 to Chinua Achebe on the 50th anniversary of his iconic novel, Things Fall Apart. In 2011, the series was officially launched by another renowned Kenyan author and historian, the late Ali Mazrui. Since then, the series has engaged emerging and established novelists, and poets in discussion on a wide range of topics related to African literature, and it has become an established stop for the winner of the annual Caine Prize for African Literature. And I want you to know that all these conversations are freely available online at the library's website at www.loc.gov. This evening, we honor a great African novelist, playwright, and scholar on the occasion of the publication of his 34th book, Minutes of Glory. Ngūgĩ Thiong'o is arguably the most renowned living African author today, and more than 50 years after Weep Not, Child, the first novel to be published in English by an East African, he remains a literary superstar and perennial favorite for the Nobel Prize. And of that famous prize, the Washington Post observed a couple of years ago, the Nobel Committee got it wrong. Ngūgĩ Thiong'o is the writer the world needs now. We're fortunate to have him now, but before we get into the program proper, I would like to acknowledge the partners who helped bring this series to the public. The Africa Society of the National Summit on Africa, under Ambassador Pamela Bridgewater, thank you. And Howard University's Department of African Studies, absolutely. Well deserved. And Howard University's Department of African Studies under Chair Mbawi Cham, and thank you too. I would also like to thank in advance Pamela Bain, President of the Africa Society, who will be emceeing tonight's multifaceted program and celebration. But to get us started, please join me in welcoming to the stage His Excellency Ambassador David Gachiru of the Embassy of Kenya. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On the onset, Professor Ngūgĩ, I want to thank you. I want to thank the African Society team who worked on their own pro bono and worked to make this project a fruition. On behalf of the Kenyan Embassy, we want to welcome everybody who has come here. For us, it's a historical moment to recognize our great professor, Ngūgĩ Thiong'o. Professor Ngūgĩ, you are an institution for truth, your honesty, and your writing. You are an inspiration for us as we are growing up. And on behalf of the Kenyan Embassy and my team here, in the presence of the audience, I have a representation from our government, our political and diplomatic secretary, Ambassador Tom Amolo. I don't know whether you are in the audience. If you could stand up. Thank you. Let's go to my government. It's an honor to have this presence, and we really thank the African Society team, Susan and Patricia, and we kept back and forth, and at some point, we always dreamed of having, how can we have Ngūgĩ wa Thiong'o come to the Library of Congress? And for us, it's a dream, and this will stay in memory. I think also my daughter is in the audience. Her name is Waregi, and I know she's very excited to come and meet with you. So on behalf of that, I just don't want to take as much more time. We are here for you. We want to listen to you. In this case, I want to welcome Professor Gekandi from Princeton University to come and give us opening remarks. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the directors of the Africa Society Board, I know that my chairman, Ambassador Pamela Bridgewater, has already been recognized. Ambassador. My name is Patricia Bain. I'm the president of the Africa Society. It's our distinct honor, Professor Ngūgĩ, for us to have you with us this evening as our featured speaker in the Conversations with African Poets and Writers. If you wonder why we are extraordinarily happy this evening, we have been planning your coming to the library for over 8 years. To borrow from Chimamanda Adichie's words, because I share her sentiment, it's an honor to have you with us this evening, because we believe that you are one of the greatest writers of our time. We're honored to have you. And without further ado, I will invite out the two lovely students for our youth tribute. Thanks.
On behalf of our generation, the youth of the continent of Africa, and young Kenyans,
we say thank you. Your extraordinary achievements that will inspire our generations for all time.
I will be reading Minutes of Glory and Other Stories by Ngūgĩ wa Thiong'o. Mugumo. Mokami stood at the door. Slowly and sorrowfully, she turned her head and looked at the hearth. A momentary hesitation, the smoldering fire, and the small stool by the fireside calling her back. No, she made up her mind. She must go. With a smooth, oiled upper garment pulled tightly over her otherwise bare head and then falling over her slim, youthful shoulders, she plunged into the lone and savage darkness. All was quiet, and a sort of magic pervaded the air. Yet she felt it threatening. She felt awed by the immensity of the darkness, unseeing, unfeeling that enveloped her. Quickly, she moved across the courtyard she knew so well, fearing to make the slightest sound. The courtyard, the 4 huts that belonged to her Eru, the silhouette of her man's hut, and even her own seemed to have joined together in one's eternal chorus of mute condemnation of her action. "You are leaving your man. Come back," they pleaded, in their silence of pitying contempt. Defiantly, she crossed the courtyard and took the path that led down to the left gate. Slowly, she opened the gate and then shut it. She stood at the moment. In that second, Mokami realized that with the shutting of the gate, she had shut off a part of her existence. Tears were immense as with heavy heart, she turned her back on her rightful place and began to move. But where was she going? She did not know, and she did not very much care, as she was to escape and go anywhere, Maasai land or Ukambani. She wanted to go get away from the hearth, the courtyard, the huts, and the people, away from everything that reminded her of Muhoroni Ridge and its inhabitants. She would go and never return to him. Her hus, no, not her husband, but the man who wanted to kill her, who would have her crushed by her soul. He would no longer be her husband, though he was the very same man she so much admitted how she loathed him now.
And I will be reading Keda Moyoru by Ngūgĩ wa Thiong'o. Ngũgana rwa Gĩkũyũ na Mũmbi, aciari a rũciaro Keda Moyoru, itũgĩ cia nyũmba ya Mũmbi, mĩhĩrĩga kenda, rũrĩra rũruru mũruru wa muoyo, kĩambi rũrĩrĩ, na cia ng'endo ciao oho ũrĩa ciamagereirie magerio-inĩ marũrũ, makĩigua mũgutharano rungu rwa thĩ, wa ithingithia ingĩthingithia thĩ, naguo ng'ong'o wa ng'ongo ĩno neno kũinaina. Rĩngĩ irima njerũ ĩgakonoka nda-inĩ ya thĩ, ĩkambata ĩkĩrĩmbũkaga mwaki, naguo mũkuru woigana kũrema tondũ wa kũrĩka na kwarama. Ũgĩthondeka atĩ mehũgũra kũrora nĩkĩ marona o rũĩ rwa mwaki rũgĩtherera thutha-inĩ wao. Magĩtambĩrĩra ng'ong'o-inĩ iria itirakana mwaki, na o rĩrĩ moiga matineke kũhurũka hanini magĩkora kĩhiga kĩngĩ gĩtune ta kĩ. Gĩkagaragara na kũrĩo. Acio ndira cia nde na ya wĩru-inĩ, rĩngĩ naguo mwaki nĩomahĩtire, magacokia ndira cia nde, o marĩona ha kũhurũka. Matongire ithukia ngoro karũndũ, nayo mĩĩrĩ yao nĩ kũinaina, no ngoro ciao itigĩenyenya, nĩ kwĩhotora mwĩhoko, ngoro na kwĩrũmarũmia rũrigi rwa ũmĩrĩro. Thank you.
Good evening. The year is 1938. Right on the equator in central Kenya, a little boy announces his arrival with an innocent cry. He is named Ngūgĩ. From this center of the world, Ngūgĩ is unaware of the unfolding global events that would transform the history of his country and the future of his world. Unlike his soft cry, these events are perceptibly explosive and blatantly tragic. The United States, Europe, and Asia are gasping for breath on the eve of the Second World War. Under the weight of unprecedented destruction, the world is only a few years away from adding to its biography the cataclysmic consequences of a nuclear bomb. In Africa, colonial powers had arrived with a bang, with an obscene lust for power, insatiable greed for resources, and a devilish desire to kill. They plundered the continent in ways that continues to haunt to date. In Ngūgĩ's Kenya, the British attempted to destroy everything. Kenyan land was taken away. The unit of the family was broken. Values that held communities together were ridiculed. Sons doubted their fathers, and daughters became strangers to their mothers. But the refusal to be defined as less human was not negotiable, and Kenyans fought back. Born in a time of war, Ngūgĩ inherited global consequences of the Second World War, evils of Pax Britannica, Kenya's epic resistance to colonialism, dreams and disillusionment of political independence, and a world controlled by powerful men. For more than half a century, Ngūgĩ has served as a continental moral conscience, connecting those global histories through powerful narratives that engage our past and the crises of the present. His words are rooted in aesthetics of Pan-Africanism and cut across transnational literary and moral ethics. The biography of Ngūgĩ provides revealing insights about the deployment of memory and the role of memory in the evolution of the African nation-state. His biography allows us to evaluate the relationship between the state and the African Memory Project. If processes of becoming of most colonized and enslaved nations have been defined by officially sanctioned programs of forgetting, Ngūgĩ's biography invites the public to resist that urge to forget, to remember. In Ngūgĩ's words, to make those memories a member again. If Ngūgĩ's compatriot Ali Mazrui was a political scientist with a literary bent, Ngūgĩ, as he has said, he is a literary artist with a political bent. I am honored to serve as his documentary biographer and to work with one of his students and my mentor, Professor Simon Gikandi of Princeton University. Ngūgĩ, I call him Mwalimu, a seeker of justice and a spring of knowledge, my teacher, my friend, and my fellow Kenyan. Ladies and gentlemen, here's a brief story of Ngūgĩ, the son of Wajiko and Thiong'o.
I was born in 1938 in Limuru, Kenya, in a rural community. My father had 4 wives. My mother was the 3rd wife of my father. We lived on land owned by an African landlord. And then later, my mother separated with my father, and she went to live in her father's land, after whom I'm named Ngūgĩ wa Gĩkonyo.
Ngūgĩ wa Thiong'o, as one of the world's foremost writers and most significant political, social, and cultural thinkers, you have shown us what it means to create cultures, to reinstate cultures, and how one may take back one's culture.
I tackle long passages that do not have illustrations. There is a passage that I read over and over again, and suddenly, one day, I start hearing music in the words. As a writer, very interesting that as a writer or a novelist, one is always trying to find oneself. I would say what you don't know is what I also don't know about myself, because I'm trying to find myself all the time.
When I hear the name Ngūgĩ wa Thiong'o, I think, of course, of the first and most important writer to have come out of East Africa.
It would be inconceivable for me to broach some of the things that I'm broaching. As a gay Ethiopian who's writing about sexuality openly in Ethiopia, in English and in Amharic. I couldn't do that without somebody like Ngūgĩ wa Thiong'o, silently telling me, be brave, speak truth to power.
Wow, Ngūgĩ wa Thiong'o, in many ways, Ngūgĩ taught us how to think, because my generation, we were literally the independence generation.
An epoch of 68 years was closing, years in which a wilderness became a thriving country. At Nairobi, the Duke of Edinburgh and Mr. Kenyatta received the freedom of the city. At midnight, the Union Jack was lowered for the last time, and Kenya ceased to be a colony and became independent.
Ngūgĩ's generation, they fought either culturally or militarily or politically to liberate us.
I think of him as a teacher and as a scholar. I think of him as someone I met first through his books and the importance of those books in recovering our histories, our cultures, our traditions.
Author, playwright, activist, and scholar, you have shown us the power of words to change the world. You have written in English and in your Kenyan language, Gikuyu. You have worked in prison cells and in exile, and you have survived assassination attempts, all to bring attention to the plight of ordinary people in Kenya and around the world. Brave wordsmith, for breaking down barriers, for showing us the potential of literature to incite change and promote justice, for helping us decolonize our minds and open them to new ideas. We are privileged to award you this degree of Doctor of Letters.
People think of, fathers and sons, in America they're born through baseball. So possibly if you ask an American child, what's your favorite, image of your father, they could say playing cards, right? For me, it would be playing with words.
He's been a very important figure in my intellectual formation, but in also a very personal way,
Man who agonizes over words, but at the same time believes his writing should have a commitment to saying something about the historical conditions of the present conditions.
I read his books as my father, but both seeing him as a scholar and my father at the same time.
Given the tremendous political pressure that was beaming down on us as we were growing up, I'll say as a father he did a good job. It's hard to evaluate your father, especially when he's especially when he's here.
A cultural and political critic of immense power, you have shown us what it means to create cultures, to reinstate cultures, and how one may take back one's culture.
Something that you guys might not know about Dad. Something that he might even keep very well under wraps. My dad is a very talented dancer.
H. Lawrence, who gave that definition of a writer, what you should do, what the duty of the writer is to be tough and survive and write. And I think Ngūgĩ has played that to the hilt. And I think that is a very great, inspiration. And of course, his contribution to the canon of East African literature is remarkable.
You look at my work generally, my novels, and although they talk about Kenyan history and other histories, but as a writer, I draw upon myself, my resources. But still you find that there are so many things you don't understand. You think you know, and then you find you don't actually know. Okay, So writing novels and say fiction generally is a way, it's a kind of exploration, both intellectual exploration and also emotional exploration. So I won't assume that even I know myself yet.
Ngūgī's also struggling with himself. It's the first translation, right? From James Ngūgĩ to Ngūgĩ wa Thiong'o. He is struggling within himself to find a place in modernity that's not fully accepting of him, has never been fully accepting of him as a black colonial subject, who's now no longer a black colonial subject, who cannot transcend the moment of having been a black colonial subject. Translation is struggle. That's what it is. It's struggle secondarily with language. It's firstly struggle with thinking. That's what Ngūgĩ is brilliant at. That's what he brings to mind. That's what he brings us to think. Yes?
I am Simon Gekandi, Professor of English at Princeton University, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Ngūgĩ today. I have been told that I have exactly 3 minutes to do this, and that's impossible. It's impossible because Ngūgĩ has had a long and good life. He's 81 years old, and he's been writing for 60 years. And he has written over 50 books and maybe 50 scholarly articles. And I've also known him for 40 years, which means there are lots of things I could say about him. But for those of us here in the audience who've not known Ngūgĩ that long, I think the best way to introduce him is through his works. Almost everyone, at least those of you from Africa, East Africa, and Kenya in particular, are familiar with Ngūgĩ's works: The River Between, Weep Not Child, The Black Hermit, A Grain of Wheat, Petals of Blood, Shaitani Mutharavaine, Gahikadeda, The Wizard of the Crow, and more recently, Kenda Muyuru. As he has also been writing, Ngūgĩ has been a great teacher. That's the first way in which I met him, as a teacher. He's been an author, he has been an intellectual, and he has also been a citizen, a very important citizen of Kenya. And for this reason especially, I'm grateful that the Kenyan embassy has been involved in this event, because I think this is one of the first recognitions by the Kenyan state of Ngūgĩ's significance in our culture. I'm also especially delighted that Ngūgĩ has been invited to the Library of Congress, this great institution. The last time I was here on the podium was to talk about Chinua Achebe, so it's only fitting that Ngūgĩ should follow the footsteps of that other great African writers. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome, and let's all welcome Ngūgĩ wa Thiong'o.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much for this great welcome. Thank you, Library of Congress and Africa Society, for the welcome, and thank you for your words of introduction. I am particularly happy that there are so many people here with whom I've interacted in my life, some as colleagues, others as students, and so on. So it's really wonderful to see all of you. Thank you, very much. Yeah. I'd like also to mention, really appreciate the presence of Dr. Freddie Matiang'i. Is he here? Matiang'i? Oh, not here. Are they here? Oh, not yet. Yeah, there are some ministers from Kenya who were supposed to be here, and I appreciate that they are coming over, but in their place, of course, there is, Ambassador David Kahiro, who met me last night, at the airport, and ensured that I am happily ensconced in my hotel room, and so on. But I can't forget, of course, Simon Gekandi, his wife, Huanda, is that correct? Huanda Gekandi, and their wonderful daughter, who is not here, Halima, who is in Kenya, and of course, Durango, who shot the film. I was, of course, very touched that Patricia Baine, correct? Not Bain, Baine. Was my chauffeur. It's not always every day that you get chauffeured by a president. And she did. So, I really appreciate, I appreciate also my fellow writers who are here. In particular, Waberi. Waberi, are you here? Yeah, Waberi. Who gave me his book, Naming the Dawn. He's already a very well-known, poet, but this is the book he has written since we last met in California. He's been in California, and then he abandoned me there in a rural outpost, and he came to the capital of power. He wanted to be near the power. So it was nice to see him, today. Yeah. Now, I can't mention all of you by names, really, because there are so many of you, but really I appreciate everything you have done for me now and interactions in the past. But I can't help just mention one. Last time I was here, it was for an event, and I think we are 3 writers who were having to do an event here, and we were snowed out. Literally, we had to stay in our hotel and watch the snow, and then return home, But thank you very much for inviting us here, and for that event, and now you've made it whole. But the fact now we are back here, although I don't have the others who are with me, but I represent their spirit. So I thought that I do a few readings, starting with my new book. I know many of you don't know that I am a poet. I know you have been whispering that he says he's a poet, but we have never seen what he has written. A poem, right? So today, I thought that being the Congress, right, an African society, I'm going to prove that I am a poet by reading from my first published book of poems. Don't tell anybody, but there are actually 6 there are only 6 poems, but but they're in book form, okay? Yeah. So now these are proof that I am actually a poet, okay? Yeah, and we're going to, I call them poems or Venetian poems or Venice poems. And I'm going to ask some friends to help me read. I'm going to ask Candy to come over here. Pietra, Kahiga, is Kahiga here? Pietro, can you come over here, please? You have the poem. Once I finish, I'll give you. Yeah. Okay. I don't have. The people have always asked me, if you write in African languages, what about we others who don't either understand African languages or don't understand the Gikuyu language, you know? Of course, I'm always surprised by this because they would never ask a French person why they write in French. Or a Japanese, why he writes in Japanese and not in Zulu. Or in Yoruba. If I had a Chinese writer, you write in Chinese, why? But an African writer, you say you write in an African language and they ask you why, right? Yeah, so I write in Gikuyu language these days, but I keep on saying that languages can connect, can network with each other, particularly through translations. So I want to read a poem. I got this idea actually from when Professor Ikandi and his wife, when I met, received us in Princeton the other day, and they had my poems read in Gikuyu, in English, and then Gikuyu, I think, and also Swahili and Portuguese, in so many languages, you know, and people seem to enjoy that. So I thought we would try this by also introducing one of my poems I wrote about Venice. What happened was this: I was invited to Venice by the University of Venice to stay there for about 3 weeks. And I had never been in a city without cars or bicycles, and most important, without roads. You know, every street was a waterway. And they only traveled from one place to another, where either you walked through so many bridges, you know, or you took a boat in the water. So there was water, rivers of waters everywhere, canals, you know. And this impressed me quite a lot. And I wrote a series of poems in Gikuyu. I'm going to read only one because there are other things too. Yeah. The book has been published in Venice. I don't know whether it's available here, but believe me, I'm not hiding it. I'm sure. It's simply that the publisher has not managed to get the copies over here. Yeah. So this is this one, Kohanyoka Itua. Kohanyokera Itua. Dathire kamukawa-ine hakuhi na kampo San Samuele. Ngimera ndirenda irio njega makiria getha ndacoka mucii Africa ngumagie cama wa irio cia matariani. Makindehera cia thamaki na thibageti ciitĩrĩirio rai mũirũ ci. Ngĩng'otha, kaya andũ aya mũrĩ a mũthemba ũrĩkũ? Mũnjitĩrĩrie irio rangi mũirũ tondũ ndĩ mũndũ mũirũ. Ngĩhiũka na ya San Samuele itarũmĩte kĩndũ nyimbĩte iromo. Mũthenya ũngĩ, Lucia de Capitani, ũrĩa wanyonagia kũu, akĩndwara mũkawa wetagwo Trattoria da Gione kũrĩa irio. Niĩ ngĩtia mbũri
na ngemera matikogerere kĩndũ kĩngĩ. Nake Lucio agĩtia irio iria endete mũno ta kĩ. Makĩmũrehera thamaki na thibageti ĩiyũire rangi mũirũ. Ĩno thamaki ya thiguidi, Lucio akiuga, nĩyo nyende mũno gũkũ gwitũ, na yendeirwo rangi ũyũ mũirũ. Na ti wa karamu umĩte thamaki-inĩ ĩno ya thiguidi wĩ mũirũ. Now we shall hear it in Italian, I think. Yeah. Pietro is my neighbor in California, but he abandoned me and came to the capital of power. In the center.
In Italian. Giudizio affrettato. In un ristorante vicino a dove abito, a Campo San Samuele, ho chiesto che mi portassero la specialità della casa. Così, una volta tornato in Africa, avrei cantato alle glorie della cucina italiana. Mi hanno portato del pesce e spaghetti ricoperti di inchiostro nero. Ma che gente è? Mi innaffiano il cibo di un inchiostro nero solo perché sono nero? Sono tornato a Campo San Samuele arrabbiato e affamato. Un altro giorno la mia guida, Lucio De Capitani, mi ha portato alla trattoria da Johnny. Io ho ordinato dell'agnello, aggiungendo subito che non mi portassero altro, per carità. Lucio ha ordinato il suo piatto preferito. Gli hanno servito pesce e spaghetti al nero. È il piatto più amato a Venezia, mi ha detto. E l'inchiostro, il nero, è la parte migliore. Non è un inchiostro stilografico. È un liquido nero spremuto da una seppia.
And this is the English translation. It's called Quick Judgment. In a restaurant near my place in Campo San Samuele, I told them I wanted their specialty so that on returning to Africa, I would sing Gloria to the taste of Italian food. They brought me fish and spaghetti with black ink all over it. What kind of people are these? They flood my food with black ink just because I'm black? I walked back to Campo San Samuele angry and hungry. Another day, my guide, Lucio De Capitani, took me to Trattoria da Johnny. I ordered lamb and hastened to tell them not to add anything to the meal. Lucio asked for the dish he loved most. They brought him fish and spaghetti flooded with black ink. This is the most beloved dish in Venice, he told me, and the black ink is what we love most. It's not pen ink. It's a black squid. It's a black liquid squeezed out of a squid.
Thank you. Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you, Petra. I'm going to, the best thing is if I can sort of read a few more sections from some of my books, and then, I'll try to get small sections. I brought even a very big one called Wizard of the Crow, but I promise you I'm not going to read the whole novel. so don't leave, okay? Yeah. And I was very grateful for, what's her name? What's your name? The lady who read from Minutes of Glory. Huh? Yeah. What's your name? Jasmine. Yeah, thank you very much for that. She just happened to read my very first story ever, which I wrote in 1960. I was, I think I was a first-year student at Makerere University College. And I want to read a little bit from my memoir called The Birth of a Dream Weaver as to how that came about. And it was because in Makerere, we had, no, I'll just narrate and then I'll read another section from it. We had a student magazine called Pen Point because the point of a pen makes a point. And the writers who were there, they were like, for we first years, it's like, they were like little gods, you know. How is it possible that one could write something and be, you know, printed in the page? So one of them was from Kenya, and his name was Jonathan Carriera. He has passed on. But I always remember our first encounter, which I talk about in my memoir, Birth of a Dream Weaver. And of course, meeting him, we just met, and then I had very few words, but I wanted to keep on talking to him, but no words would flow. So second time I meet him, I know I'm not going to lose this chance, you know. But again, words escaped me. So I say the first words that come to my mouth. Excuse me, Mr. Carriera, you know, I've written a short story. Would you like to look at it? Yeah, right? Would you like to look at it? And he says, yes, of course. And then, oh, do you have it with you? Excuse me a little bit. Actually, I should have said I was thinking of writing it. So I told him, finishing touches, I'll bring it someday, you know. So, so that night, I had to sit down and write that story, which is Mugumo, the one you read. And I started literally with the words which you read, okay? So you reminded me of my history, okay? But the second section I want to read, again, connected with also stories from Minutes of Glory. That story is in Minutes of Glory. But I'm going to read another section from my memoir, third memoir, called Birth of a Dream Weaver, which really talk about my college days and how I came to write, you know, including that story of my first short story, which was fiction. Then I turned fiction into fact, or I don't know which is which. Yeah, okay. Then I wrote another story called The Return. Again, you can find it in this book. And this story, The Return, actually got some traction and was published in a new journal, which had been started by Raja Ngūgĩ in Kampala, called Translation. Translation still continues strongly in Harvard now, and so it's continued many, many years after Raja Ngūgĩ has passed on. But this was a short story which I believe made me get invited to the first conference of African writers at Makerere, of English expression at Makerere in 1962. Remember, I'm still a student, this time second-year student, and I'm invited to the gathering, which brought together Chinua Achebe, Wallace Soyinka, Ezekiel Mpalele, Louis Nkosi, and all of them had been published. But me, only 2 stories. I had actually finished 2 manuscripts of a novel, but nobody knew about them, okay? Yeah. And among those who came to the conference, guess who? Have you ever heard of a writer called Langston Hughes? Sure? You are sure you have? Okay, he was there at the conference, okay? Right, you know. So, you know, it's very important because he connected that conference in a way intellectually to other congresses of black writers in Rome and Paris and so on. But this was one of the first, really, the first to be held on the continent. And his presence was very important. Now, remember, I'm a second-year student. It's during the vacation, other students had gone for their vacation, but we writers, you see what I'm saying? We writers, we writers were left, to use some of their rooms now. I'm talking about they, not me. Now, among, of course, things which excited me was the fact that my short story, The Return, was going to be discussed. Well, but the bit I want to tell you is about Langston Hughes. Because Langston Hughes once asked me to take him on a tour of the city. And I'm saying, me? Take this icon of the Harlem Renaissance on a tour of the city I loved? And I tried to map out the route. Where to start? Now, for those who are living in Kampala, Kampala is built on hills, like Rome itself. And it's got incredible cathedrals, Anglican, Catholic, and Muslim temples. It's very, very beautiful. So I was thinking that the best thing is for me to take this icon on the most modern parts of Kampala. I want him to see how modern Kampala was, okay? Yeah. So not knowing how I was going to accomplish all this with uncertain public transport, we walked down the hill and turned left on Makerere Hill Road to Wandegea. Now, Wandegea is like, in the modern world, this, how in the modern world, what we call modernity is largely splendor. Like you see these wonderful buildings, everywhere, all over the world, and splendor, actually literally built on squalor. Huh? Yeah. So the same thing in a way, because the University of Makerere was very, very beautiful. It's on a hill, and so next to it, literally, was this place called Wandegea, which was really a run-down area, where artisans were, making tools and so on, or making, things with the few tools which they had, or whatever. Yeah. So we walked down Makerere Hill Road to Wandegea, where I hoped we would catch a taxi or a bus to the center of the city. Wandegea, literally next door to the college, was a rundown area with a cacophony of sounds from the multitude of artisans hammering scrap iron and aluminum into different shapes to make household utensils, and from human voices of ragged-trousered clients in and out of numerous tiny bars that sold matoke. Matoke is food made of banana, beer. Waragi is a very strong distilled hard liquor, homemade, which could knock you off like that. And now, this milling crowd, its wails and shouts and ribald laughter, and the voice from the radio, all that seemed to fascinate Langston Hughes, and not talk of monuments would dislodge him from there. Actually, in his casual wear, Langston Hughes blended into the scene more than I did with my gray Gabbani trousers and black blazer. By the way, in Makerere, we used to dress as if we were perpetually on our way to a cocktail party. He tasted the waragi brew, just a sip, and the matoke, just a taste. Otherwise, for the 1 hour that we roamed from shop to shop, one pile of goods to another in an open-air street market, bumping against one drunk and another, he seemed more interested in absorbing the atmosphere of harmony in dissonance that surrounded us, perhaps reminding him of his new release called Ask Your Mama, 12 Moods for Jazz. Yeah. But a scene which I'll never forget. Yeah. And now, I want to read a little bit from, again, Minutes of Glory. Minutes of Glory is actually like my literary autobiography, in a sense that it contains all the stories I've written over a period of years. From the one I began to write in Makerere to the last two, which I wrote in Irvine as a distinguished professor of English and comparative literature at the University of California, Irvine. Okay. One is called, actually, The Ghost of Michael Jackson. I'll not read from that one. But I want to read one called Without a Shadow of Doubt, my first lesson in art and film. Let me explain the background. In my home in California, anyway, I tried this trick with my children. I want them to, and Mombi in the film talks about this a little bit, tell them stories instead of material gift. And they liked it, but still that material gift was important. But nevertheless, yeah, and I would ask whenever, and I thought I would start with me. So whenever it came to my birthday, I would say, don't buy me anything, just write me a story or a poem or do a performance on the piano or say anything which you have done with your hands or, okay? But then they turned tables around when it came to my buying them gifts. Like Thiong'o, the youngest, one day he waited until literally it was Christmas the following day, and he told me for a gift he wanted a story from me. Right, so that's how I started writing some stories, for them, This was written for my daughter, Mombi, and I was in Cape Town when I remembered. It was either her birthday or Christmas, and I had to write this story very quickly. It's called Without a Shadow of a Doubt. Let me read a few paragraphs. Jinjo, my younger brother, claimed he could catch his own shadow. Older by a year, I was not about to admit that I was any less able. A rivalry of sorts grew into a sibling race to be the first to achieve that fate. With a grim but eager determination of bounty hunters, we set out to capture our shadows. They proved very cunning. They would run away from us, but annoyingly kept the same speed as we did, accelerating when we did, slowing down when we did, and stopping when we did. Okay, we decided to run away from them. The same pattern ensued. They followed us, doing whatever we did, literally at the same time and speed that we did it. Let us carry a load on our heads, in our hands, on our backs, or push the rim of a bicycle wheel. Our shadows would come up with an exact replica. On moonlit nights, they were there, walking behind us, in front of us, beside us, mocking our failure to turn them into captives. We escaped them only when it became dark. Initially, a matter of pride at our doing it, but as soon as we sat by the fireside, they were back. Alas, it was not we who had escaped them, but rather they who had hidden in the darkness, only to reappear suddenly and dramatically at storytelling time. They played on the walls, on our faces, and depending on the flames, they would actually dance. Sometimes they would multiply themselves and continue mocking us in moves and waves that seemed choreographed to achieve maximum mockery. So, but we went on arguing about the shadows in different ways, and eventually we even came to argue about the ontology of shadows. You know, the shadow in the mirror is the same thing as the shadow in the water. You know, what is it? You know, and then most important, our argument, because we always took different sides of the question. We argued about shadow, about the color of shadows. We disagreed on the color of human shadows. Noting that ours were black, were always black, my brother asserted with absolute certainty that it was simply because we were black. Black shadows were for black people, he said. White shadows for white people. Brown for brown people. The shadows, after all, imitated us in everything. Why not in the color of the skin? When I pointed out that shadows from plants were also dark, he said it was because they were plants. Human shadows were different. After all, plant shadows were stationary. We could only settle the dispute by checking with humans. Now, there were no whites in our village. They lived on the other side of the railway line, hidden behind big houses in big plantations and inside automobiles. Our best hope was with Indians. Now, they may not have been as white as the whites from Europe, but we could draw logical conclusions from any difference we detected between African and Indian shadows. So one day, we set out to the Indian shopping center, 2 miles from our village. In keeping with the solemnity of our mission, we had our single calico wear washed properly and dried by the fireside the night before. Thus, we dressed in our clean best. We did not whisper the intent of our journey of exploration to our parents or any other of our siblings. And although I took a different view of the matter, I was not averse to my brother being right. Really, when you come to think of it, a white shadow would be something to behold. And so it was with great curiosity and anticipation that we looked out at our first Indian encounters, children outside their shops. Their shadows behaved in the same way that ours did. The avatars followed and ran away, but never completely detaching themselves from the body of the Indian original. And they were black. Maybe it was because they were shadows of children, but it turned out to be the same with Indian adults. Dark shadows. But wait a minute. But whites, real whites, real white shadows. And then good luck fell upon us. A white couple drove past in a car. And you can read the rest from Minutes of Glory. Yes, yeah. So.
Ready for a discussion.
Ready for a discussion.
Okay.
Can I read one more piece? One more. I'll read one more piece, and then, because this one is about you guys, you know, all of you. I mean, I'll tell you why. Let me see what I can find. Oh, yeah. Now, are there children here? I think it's all right. I'll not say anything bad, but something you are going to. But listen, even if you listen carefully, because it happened to you, okay? But it happened to your parents. You can ask them quietly, you know, when they first met, right? Okay. So I'll give you a secret when they first met, okay? Right, if they have not told you. And all of you actually, not only them, but even you, I know, yeah. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because I'm always fascinated by sometimes you have known a person for a long time, or you've been there, but one day something happens, you know, like you see them in a different light or something, you know, right? You see, I see Simon, Dad's like, yes, I remember. Okay, this is about you, Candy, and Huanda, okay? Right. Now, this concerns one, this comes from the novel Wizard of the Crow, and it concerns a dictatorship which wants to build a house that reaches heaven so he can be a neighbor to God, okay? Although the payment will be done, they borrow money from the global bank. And of course, the people of that country who will pay back the loan and all that, you know. Naturally, there is resistance to that project called Marching to Heaven. And it's led by a woman called Nyawera. But she has also a friend called Kamete, who is educated in India, and he doesn't quite believe in this sort of organized. He believes he's read some Indian Ramayana and Mahabharata, and he believes in finding oneself, you know, go to a forest and find yourself, that kind of thing. Nyawera, on the other hand, believes in organizing, you know, right? In organizing. So, and she's the leader, secret leader of the voice for the movement of the people. But they are friends. And one day she goes to seek him in the forest. I'll talk about this business of finding yourself in the forest instead of among the people. To tell him that no matter how you find yourself in the forest alone, it's not going to change the reality of a dictatorship, okay? But otherwise, they were like-minded about so many things, you know, and they've been together, you know, just friends, you know, and they talked, they told stories and that kind of thing, you know, and then, you know, on this occasion, they even stopped, and in unison sang a song about animals. It's a counting song about zebra red and others and so on, you know. But they sang it together, just as they were used to doing, okay. It was a song that helped them count up to 10, but the logic was in the rhythm instead of the meaning of the words. Once again, they laughed together, and as they looked in each other's eyes, they were suddenly without words. They resumed their walk in silence, taken up by the light they saw in each other's eyes. Love was everywhere. It was there in the tree branches where the nests of willow birds hung, in the fern where the widow bird had left 2 long black tail feathers. It was there in the murmurings of the Eldoret River as it flowed eastward before turning into a roaring waterfall. It was there in the sun's rays which pierced through the waterfall, splitting into the 7 colors of the rainbow. It was there in the still waters of a small lake made by the river, where Kamete and Nyawera now swam and bathed and chased each other, splashing water on each other. It was there in the blackjacks, the goose grass, and other plants, the flowers and seeds of which stuck to their wet clothes. It was there in the movement of porcupines and hedgehogs. It was there in the wings of the helmeted and crested guinea fowls, francolins that scampered away after stealing glances at the couple. It was there in the honeybees and butterflies hopping from flower to flower. It was there in the cooing of the doves, in the mating calls of the river frogs from among the reeds and water lilies. Love was there among the creeping plants that twined around the tree trunks. Yes, it was there in the blackberries, some of which they plucked and fed to each other. Love was there in the breeze that made the leaves sway ever so gently. Love was everywhere in this forest, but neither Nyawera nor Kamete mentioned the word love. Thank you. I'm done. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. I was looking for you. Yeah.
Okay, this one is working. And can you hear me on this one? Yes?
Hello, hello, testing. 5, 4, 3, 2. Oh, it's working. Okay.
Well, I have to say that this is the culmination of a dream for me. Ever since we had Chinua Achebe in here in 2008, I said the next one has to be Ngūgĩ wa Thiong'o. I'm quite sure his family and friends have told me I've been chasing him all over the world, and it's just such an honor for me to have you here tonight. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
As a writer myself who has not written a book, this is inspiration and a culmination. So I'm going to abbreviate my questions because we would have rather heard from you than from me. So I'm going to ask you a few questions for our conversations with African poets and writers. So you write in many different genres. Why is that?
Yeah, as a writer, you try to kind of, in a way, challenging oneself, but sometimes you don't choose, some themes, organize themselves around, say, a short story, and in the case of poetry, for instance, it's not something which I do consciously. Like Venice in this time was so, I just couldn't find any other way of talking about Venice except through those, poems, and I've done that, especially since I started writing in Gikuyu language. Poetry comes in English. I find it very difficult to write a poem in English, because the sound system don't have the same resonance for me in English, but in Gikuyu, I can play around with alliteration. Like for some of you who are able to follow from my new book, Kenda Moyuru, or the perfect 9. And at some point, I'm going to tell you about it, by the way. If you listen to the young man who read very, very well, and thank you very much, Kimani, or is his name again? Not Kimani, yes. Thank you very much for your reading. You actually read very well. You could hear the sounds, I play a lot with the alliteration, when I'm writing in Gikuyu, so it depends, on the mood, but it's also a challenge to try different things. I write theory. I'm very fascinated by theory, but not theory in the abstract sense. I like theory that comes from practice, So people are surprised when they read a book like, not surprised really, but I think they're fascinated by, say, when they write, say, Decolonize the Mind. It's a book of theory, yes, but it draws from personal experiences and you connect with what you have. So that's how you try different. It's like, write words, their language is like a musical instrument. Just like musicians, some try, even though they are good at classical piano, for instance, but sometimes when they find a guitar, they may want to try it a little bit, or they try the flute and other things. Actually, it's the same with various genres, yeah.
Okay. I guess I got so excited up here, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Eve Ferguson. I'm reference librarian for East Africa and Ghana here at the Library of Congress. We study Ngūgĩ wa Thiong'o all the way through my undergrad in Howard and grad school. And so now you know who I am. I can go on with the questions.
Oh, thank you.
You've long led the movement to write in African languages in the mother tongue. Have your thoughts or trajectory changed about this over time?
No, I've become even stronger I've come to believe so much in not just African languages. I've come to realize actually it's not just African languages, That's one of the problems we have in the world is a hierarchy of languages. Seeing that some languages are inherently more of language than others. And I can tell you, it's absolute and utter nonsense. There's no language which is more of a language than any other language. Okay? That's where, but, yeah. The question of hierarchy, language hierarchy is a question of power, relationship, nothing more. Is one power, really suppressing the language of the dominated, but as a means of dominating them, right? And you can see this. I've now looked at the Spanish colonialism. I've looked at, the British colonialism on Ireland, English colonialism in Ireland, settlement here in America, their treatment of Native American languages. I looked at the treatment of Maori languages in New Zealand, in Australia, also when Japan occupied Korea. The same pattern, power, they find it important to suppress the language of the other and humiliate people. Not even suppress, humiliate them, punish them for speaking their mother tongue. Okay? Today, and I can prove this in 5 seconds. Can I prove this in 5 seconds?
Yes.
Yeah. We're next to Georgetown University. Yeah. You got Georgetown University of Princeton, since Gandhi is here. Gandhi is asking me, what about Princeton? Yeah. Yeah. So say Princeton, or Georgetown University. You can actually, you can take French, for instance. And you can get a degree in Spanish. But they don't tell you that you must first of all give up the English you have. Right? If you go to study in France, to study French, and you ask, Japan, they don't tell you to give up Japanese as a condition of learning French. But in all colonial situations, and I'm saying all, they always humiliate people about their mother tongue, punish people about their mother tongue, violence against people speaking their mother tongue. And that one has no educational value whatsoever, right? It does not make them necessarily better English speakers or knowledge or whatever, because you can know Norwegian and come and study English, but you don't have to give up Norwegian. But in all colonial situations, they always make the colon give up their language and humiliate them about their language, make them feel ashamed, distance themselves with their language and from their language and so on, because it's a question of power, right? It's a question of create colonies of the mind. People feeling not sure about themselves, about their history, about their whatever is carried by that language. But the other way around is, if you know one language, your mother tongue, the language of your culture, and you add other languages to it, it's very, very powerful. Many doors are open to you. It's power. But many colonized people are, in fact, like they have two legs, and they are told to give up one of their legs, that they are better off when they are hopping on when they are hopping on one leg, especially with a borrowed leg, right? And we accept as normal. No, it's not. We really have to fight very strongly against this. I believe very strongly. Wherever I go in the world these days, I talk about this because it's a terrible thing. The damage, the trauma that this does to people who are subject to that kind of violence or humiliation about the language produced by their mothers and fathers and so on. It's something people, it's like a wound in the heart, so to speak, and it stays there for a long time. It can be seen as, we can turn abnormalities into normalities. We normalize abnormality. And for Africa, we have to undo this abnormality. And in fact, not only Africa, all over the world, we really should make sure it's made illegal for anybody to perpetrate violence on anybody for them speaking their mother tongue. That should be illegal. It should be banned all over the world, Yeah. There's no room for humiliating a person because they are speaking the language which they found their mother speaking. It's horrible, the trauma, okay? So I've become a believer in that even more, all right?
Okay.
Yeah. and by the way, I must tell you this, because there are some benefits, of course. I don't just do it, there are some benefits, like this. Like one discovery I made recently. It's a secret, but let me tell it to you. Oh, okay. So they can hear, okay. Yeah. You see, when I wrote my epic, I tried an epic for the first time, Kedamoyuru, the one from which they read, This Kedamoyuru actually is about the origins, the myth of origins of the Gikuyu people. And it goes like this. Gikuyu and Mombi were the original father and mother of the Gikuyu community. And they had 9 daughters. Actually, there were 10, but we say 9. And when you want to say 10, you say perfect 9. Okay? Perfect 9 means 10. Okay? Now, when it came to, they didn't have brothers. When it came to marriage, apparently there were no young men around. So the father went to go to the mountain and ask God, and sooner or later there are about 9 handsome young men around, But where did they come from? I asked myself. And then I was actually in Irvine, when I literally, so I'm telling you, it was just a revelation. This is how it worked my mind. These girls, these are 10 of them, by the time they were of marriageable status, marriage status, they had no brothers. So these girls were doing everything. You know, they had to build, make clothes, know how to defend themselves. They were, they plan everything, themselves, because they had nobody to depend upon. They had no brothers. Your brother will do this for you. Huh? Your brother will go and hunt for you. So they made things. They built houses. They made weapons of war. They knew how to defend themselves. So this is a revelation. Have you ever heard of the word feminism? 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 Huh? You have heard, huh? Feminism. Actually, the secret is those were the original feminists. Yeah. So, the book is now, the epic is now out as Kedamo Yeru in Kenya, and it will probably come out next year, I hope, in English, under the title, The Perfect Nine. So if you want to know about the original feminists, get a copy and tell your friend to get a copy, okay? It's a secret, but the secret is an open secret. You can pass it on. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. There's been an explosion of literary activity in Africa throughout the past years, with many more literary festivals and prizes, specifically for African writers. Are you involved in this movement, and how?
Now, first of all, prizes. Okay. Now, I'm not discouraging prizes. If you read my memoir, The Birth of a Dream Weaver, I wrote my first novel for a prize. So I'm not discouraging prizes. But it's very interesting when you come to think of it. How come all these prizes are there to promote African literature, but on condition that they don't write in African languages, right? This is it's so absurd. It's like creating a prize for French writers to promote French literature, but on condition that they don't submit their works in French. They submit in Chinese. Then they are promoting French literature, right? Mm-hmm. So those prizes are very wonderful. And as I said, I wrote for a prize. Yeah. But taken in totality, you can see how they are also contributing towards this, making this absurdity normal and actually desirable, right? But it's not only prizes, of course, African governments, themselves, that's why I had hoped the ministers were here from Kenya. But those ambassadors who are here, please take this to your government, African governments must come up with positive policies towards African languages. These must ban the violence against African kids for speaking their mother tongues. And the most important, African governments must put resources into the learning of and perpetuation of African languages. And I'll end up with what I say, that if you know all the languages of the world and you don't know your mother tongue or the language of your culture, there's like self-alienation, or enslavement, self. But if you know your mother tongue or the language of your culture, then add all the languages of the world to it. That is empowerment, you know. And what we really want is empowerment. You know, the whole point of learning and knowledge is not to disable somebody, you know, but rather to empower them, right? Yeah. So really, this empowerment of African languages to me seems to be very, very important, you know. And all those of you who are here, connect the governments and so on, please pass on the word to African governments to come up with positive policies backed by resources towards African languages here.
And because we are swiftly running out of time, I'll make this my last question, and it might be one that makes you happy. You're the patriarch of what could be referred to as a writing dynasty.
Oh, yes.
Can you tell us about the next generation of your progeny?
The next what?
The next generation.
Oh, I think she's talking about the fact that four of my kids are published authors. One of them, Ali Mukoma Wangu, preceded me here. You know, he already has given a talk here, you know, the Library of Congress. Okay, he's now a professor of English at Cornell University. Yeah, he has about 6 books to his credit. You know, but others as well. You know, there's one called Dosho Ngūgĩ who is residing in New York, and he actually, in a way, he's a professional writer. He sits at home to write and looked out there, one baby. His wife, a doctor, goes to work. He does the writing and looks at the baby, right? You know, he has 2 novels. I think he has 2 novels now out, and he has 3 or 4 in the process of coming out. You know, and Wanjiko Ngūgĩ, my daughter, you know, also has a novel, The Fall of Saints. You know, she's also very well known, you know, getting up to be well known as a short story writer. So apart from The Fall of Saints, she has a number of short stories. In fact, she is included in the Busby's, The New Daughters of Africa, right? You know. So I hope they continue writing and challenge me. But I also say, no, if you challenge me, you know, okay, let me tell you another one. Sometimes we have contests. And there's one contest we had. Actually, this was one of my sons called Björn, who lives with his Swedish mother in Gothenburg. And I went to see him in Stockholm, and we were eating some food at a restaurant. He was having wine, you know, red wine, my white wine. And then somehow, I don't know how this came about, he challenged me into a contest to write a story using 2 glasses of wine. The story must take place in the restaurant where we were in Stockholm, right? You know, but from there, they can go anywhere. When the other kids heard about this, they said they also wanted to join the competition. So actually, only in the end, I think only 4 were able to join in the contest. And I do have an incredible collection of short stories, 5 of them, all based in Stockholm. And some of the best of those stories were like one written by my older son called he calls himself Thiong'o. And I don't think Thiong'o or Ngūgĩ has ever been to Stockholm. But but the feel of the place, you're in Stockholm and you read it, you know, it's kind of, you say, yes, you don't believe that he's not been there. Yeah. So it's really wonderful what you can do with imagination. Yeah. So this is the latest in the family. It's called, the title of the collection will be called The Glass, not a class struggle, but the glass struggle. Yeah. And by the way, I wrote mine in Gikuyu. You can't. I wrote mine in Gikuyu and had translated into English. Yeah, okay. Yeah. They wrote in English, of course. They don't always obey me when it comes to language.
Well, I know that you're proud of your writing children and all of your other children, and the children who you did not create but inspired, all of the African writers who have looked up to you. And because of that, we want to honor you tonight with a very special recognition now that we finally got you into the Library of Congress.
By the way, talking of the younger generation, I met a young man. Where's Kimani? Has he left?
He might have had to go to school tomorrow.
Oh, okay. I found a young man here called Kimani, and I taught him Gikuyu in 5 minutes. Huh?
Yeah.
How to read the Gikuyu language.
Because you are Mwalimu,
Yeah,
the
Mwalimu.
teacher.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so we have something special for you.
I'm Sarah Kurusu with the Africa Society. Before I present this award, I would like to have all the partners come up front, please. The Africa Society, the Library of Congress, Howard, Dr. Gakandi, Dr. Washanga,
Oh, I stand up. Yeah. I'm gazing at them. Oh, good to see you again. Right.
Professor Ngūgĩ. It's with great pleasure that I present you this award on behalf of all of us for the great work that you've done that continues to inspire all of us. The inscription reads, presented to Professor Ngūgĩ wa Thiong'o for unprecedented contributions to the continent of Africa and the literary world on the occasion of participation in conversation with African poets and writers, the Library of Congress, May 9, 2019.